I've spent a bit of time recently looking at supposedly conservative principles, a lot of it brought on by the alt-right demanding that only they have any conservative values, and I have a hard time keeping from laughing. So one of them threw up a link to a website about conservative thinker Russell Kirk, and I thought I'd take some time looking at what Kirk thought. There are many different schools of conservative thought, and I agree with some of them and not so much on others. So let's see how Kirk fares. Now, the first one has to do with moral order, and of course, in the mind of a lot of conservatives, that means one thing: God. And the problem is, all moral truths are inherently subjective. Every shred of objective evidence we have points to that fact, so the idea of an enduring objective moral order, that makes no sense whatsoever. Does that mean we can't come up with an enduring subjective moral order? No, of course not. But it means that we have to recognize that moral order comes from man, not some imaginary friend in the sky. And a lot of conservatives, mostly neocons, seem to think that the collapse of Western society will be caused by the failure of this enduring objective moral order, that the fall of supposed Judeo-Christian values will somehow herald the end of Western democracy. These people, unfortunately, confuse correlation with causation. Christianity is not what made America great. It may have provided some of the substrate upon which the greatness could grow, but it is not in and of itself all that wonderful to begin with. We simply have to replace it with something better, and as religion continues to fail in the West, that replacement needs to come soon. Number 2 argues that conservatives need to adhere to custom, convention, and continuity. And to a limited degree, I agree. I always put it as we need to keep what already works until something demonstrably better comes along. We do not have change for the sake of change. We need to worry about how our society actually operates instead of having chaos that doesn't do anyone any good. And again, I think that there are some conservatives, particularly neocons and many on the alt-right, who go way the hell too far. They want no change ever for any reason, period. And that makes no sense at all. Whether they like it or not, the world continues to change, and we have to change with it. But that change cannot come willy-nilly. It can't come without a purpose, which is something that the political left likes to push. If we have a system that works, then we stick with that system until there's a logical and demonstrable reason to change to something else. We don't throw caution to the wind and change because change is available, even if that change will ultimately harm social cohesion. So within reason, I guess I'll support this one. Number 3 argues that holding positions for no reason other than they've been held in the past for a very long time is a positive, and obviously here I disagree. Once people believed the earth was flat. It was believed for a very long time. That's no reason to believe it today, because it was simply wrong. Unfortunately, especially as you get farther to the right, there is a distinct anti-intellectual bias. People are terrified of knowledge. People are terrified of education. They don't want to learn anything new because new things might prove old things wrong, and that simply can't be allowed to happen. And this is why there's such an absurd amount of hero worship on the right-wing fringes, where they bow down to the founding fathers, to old philosophers, and really to anyone who lived a century or more ago, because they must have known better than we do. And I find this laughable at best. It's idealizing the past when a lot of these people really had no knowledge, no education. I mean, they were just people. They weren't any better than the people today. In fact, in a lot of ways, they were inferior. But that doesn't stop the far right from worshiping them like gods just because they lived a long time ago. No thank you. Now, number 4 gets back to something worthwhile. And I think it's funny how the even numbers seem good and the odd numbers seem bad, kind of like old Star Trek movies. Anyhow, Here we deal with prudence, the idea that we need to consider the long-term effects of decisions, not just the short-term gains. And this is something that I think has largely been lost in modern American politics, especially because of the election cycle. All politicians have to produce results right now, or they'll be thrown out of office. No matter how good the long-term results might be, it's only the short term that actually matters, and this has led to a lot of short-sighted decisions made at the highest levels of government. Of course, this is largely the fault of the American people who just want it all right now. They aren't willing to wait. They don't want things to be better for their children. They want all the benefits and none of the costs right this minute. And I'm sorry to say, but that's just not how reality works. And it's one reason why this country is so screwed up right now, because nobody wants to sacrifice today for increased benefits in the future. So yes, I'm totally on board with this one. And we're right back to something I disagree with, as they try to express hatred for egalitarianism. Now, yes, there is something to this, wherein we do have to have differences in outcomes based on differences of effort, and that's something I agree with. But this often gets taken by the racists on the alt-right as a prescription for racism. In fact, this is exactly the point that brought me to Kirk's writings, because a racist tried to show me that racism is part and parcel with conservatism. Yeah, not so much. Now, yes, there will always be some forms of inequality because people are inherently unequal, not in race or gender, but in the amount of effort that they're willing to put out to reach goals. And this is why conservatives support equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome. People need to take advantage of their opportunities and ultimately be responsible for making good use of the tools at their disposal. Those that don't deserve to fail. But that doesn't mean that we decide arbitrarily that some groups automatically deserve to fail and set them up to do so because of some arbitrary physical characteristic. That's what the idiot racists want. That's not what rational conservatives want. Yes, I would agree that man is inherently imperfect and will never achieve perfection through any means. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive for perfection or get as close as we can. A lot of this goes back to Christianity, though, the idea that man is inherently sinful and can never achieve anything without the help of an imaginary man in the sky. And it should be no surprise, I totally disagree with that concept. I don't think we'll ever achieve perfection by any means, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't better ourselves at every turn possible. And that means that ultimately everything is up for grabs, that we can't afford to have any sacred cows that can never change if a better solution comes along. Reaching perfection and approximating the closest to perfection we can achieve, those are not the same thing. One is worthwhile, one is not. One is possible, the other is not. We simply cannot afford to hold the belief that we're forever going to fail, that we're inherently incapable of success, so we shouldn't even bother to try. I actually agree here, which is kind of weird for an odd number, but I think property rights are extremely important to conservatism. But the one thing that I think both the far left and the far right fail to recognize is that you yourself are property. You are the property of yourself. Your body, your mind, your thoughts, all of them are your property, and you need to not only have the right to them, but the right to control them. Because while the regressive left is entirely in favor of bodily autonomy, at least to a certain degree, they hate the idea that you can have ideas which oppose their ideology. They operate solely in collectivist terms. They don't want individuals to be able to oppose them. And the far right hates bodily autonomy, especially abortion. But they also hate mental autonomy. Both sides aren't wild about things like voluntary suicide. But you need to be able to control what you do with your body and accept the consequences thereof, as well as control what goes on in your head, again with the consequences that go along with it. Now, this is one that I will strongly agree with. America can be no stronger than Americans want it to be. And in modern America, we are so ridiculously fragmented, not only politically, but along racial and gender lines, that we are no longer a single nation, but a disparate collection of nation states. There is no core to being an American anymore. But really, this is the core of the leftist position. This is how they destroy nations. You only have to look at what's going on in Europe right now to see that this is true. And that's why I argue that conservatism builds nations and liberalism tears them down. Mostly because liberals have no idea what makes a successful nation in the first place. There needs to be a common connection between the citizens of any successful country, and that connection is not religion, it's not skin color, it's a mental identification with the nation itself and the good of the nation going forward. And we've lost all that because liberals hate America. They hate every country there is. They keep trying to change them all. They keep trying to eliminate national identity. They're not even hiding the fact that they hate these countries anymore.
That you apparently love so much.
No, I really don't. I fucking hate this country.
That's why I say leave.
I hate it, and I'm not
That's why I say leave.
I'm staying here because there's shit that needs to be fixed here, so that's why I'm staying.
This is why liberalism needs to go away. On this one, yes and no, because I really disagree with the whole premise here. It says that political power is the ability to do as one likes, regardless of the will of those around you. And yes, in many cases, that's how politicians actually operate. In fact, I would argue that's one of the biggest problems we have right now, because politicians go into politics for the good of themselves, not the good of the nation. The political parties don't care what's best for the country, they only want power for themselves and their ideologies. Neither side stops to think what would realistically happen if they won absolute power and could achieve their political goals. Because on both sides, that would be absolutely disastrous. Politicians just want to get reelected, and to do so, they will do anything, say anything that will get them votes from the people on their side of the political aisle. And because we're so ideologically deadlocked in this country, the idea of compromise, of reaching out across the aisle for the good of the nation, neither side has any interest in that, and in fact, they know they'd get crucified if they even tried. So things just get worse and worse. We have the wrong people in power because the political system we've built guarantees that only the wrong people will ever get elected. This whole thing, it's just a mess. And number 10, it kind of goes back to things we've already talked about. The idea that we don't change without a good reason, but if there is a good reason, we can't be afraid to change. And I think both sides in modern America are a complete disaster when it comes to this. The right doesn't want to change, even when change makes sense and is clearly necessary, such as gay marriage, but they cling to religious fundamentalism, which is a mind killer at all levels. The left wants change, even when it's completely insane, such as bringing in Islamic refugees without any vetting, knowing full well that they may be terrorists we're bringing into our midst. Both sides are wrong, and almost no one out there is pointing it out. And for the few of us who are, nobody's listening. It's all emotional posturing for a nation that is largely incapable of thinking intellectually. And it's getting worse, not better. If you want to know what will bring an end to the nation, this is it. And since the left would like nothing better than to see an end to Western democracy, they're doubling down on their own stupidity like never before. Just try to have an intellectual discussion with these people. Try. You won't succeed. Because I know I've tried and failed, just like I've tried and failed debating the idiots on the far right. It's all emotion, no intellect, and this is what's going to kill us. So there's my take on Russell Kirk's 10 conservative principles. I figure I agreed with, at least partially, maybe half of them, and largely disagreed with the rest. And a lot of these ideas are simply not intellectually valid. They're not based on rationality and critical thought. They're based on pure emotion and wishful thinking, and that's a problem. But the left are no better. I haven't come across a list of liberal principles yet, but if I do, I'm going to take those on as well. And if I find other lists of conservative values, I'll take a look there too. The only way we can combat emotion and irrationality is to understand what these people believe and why. You can't change their minds, but at least you can challenge their presumptions, and maybe that's all we can do as we fight a culture war against both sides. One way or another, things are going to change. And if we don't do something, everything is going to end, and we can't allow that.
Changes.